One thing I tried to do in the book was to give the past a present tense. So each chapter begins with a scene from the present. And the chapter on Native Milwaukee begins with a description of a bingo session at Potawatomi Bingo. You know, on a Wednesday afternoon, the parking lots are already full. You know, thousands of cars there. And the first settlers here, you know, may have gone back 10, 12,000 years. The Potawatomi are a bit more recent, 1600s, and they were pushed west from their homeland in what's now lower Michigan by Iroquois war parties, you know, who were moving west from what's now upstate New York. So they became the dominant tribe along the eastern shore of Lake Michigan from Door County all the way down to Chicago. And Milwaukee, like other settlements along the lake, was Potawatomi, importantly, but also Chippewa, Ottawa, Sauk, Fox. There was a real kind of a sort of a precursor of the ethnic diversity that we still have today. You know, it goes way back to native settlement. You had a pretty wide variety of tribes making their homes here. But the Potawatomi were the first among equals, certainly.
You had explorers, fur traders were among the first non-Native Americans, I assume, to be here, and one of them played a role in development.
Sure,
of the
yes,
city.
Solomon Juneau. Milwaukee's first mayor when the city was incorporated back in 1846. And he's very unusual because usually the fur traders were pushed aside by promoters. You know, they were wilderness people who wanted the land to stay as it was. So sometimes they've been described as the pioneers of the pioneers. Juneau stayed, and he translated what he knew about retail on the fur trade side to the real estate side, and did quite well. He had a partner named Morgan Martin, who was the fourth member of the pioneer trio, along with Byron Kilburn on the west side and George Walker on the south side. But he stayed here to win and then lose, you know, when things soured during the Panic of 1837, a fortune in real estate. And then Milwaukee was incorporated in 1846. And the mayor's post for him was somewhat honorary, you know, but he was a real touchstone, a real contact with this area's distant past.
I believe you believe that that Martin was the fourth founder of the city,
Yeah,
actually,
oh, sure,
right?
yeah. He was a Green Bay man, a Green Bay lawyer, and lived there for the rest of his life, but was Juneau's partner in real estate development, you know, on the east side. The fur trading post, by the way, was right in the corner of Water Street and Wisconsin Avenue. I mean, not many people realize that that was the heart of downtown Milwaukee, you know, way back in the about 1825, you know, is when he put up a post there.
There's also a fur trading post in what is now Mitchell Park,
right.
which had a relationship to, it was Solomon Juneau's father-in-law, I believe.
Right, Jacques Viau. And Josette, who was Viau's daughter, you know, married Juneau back in 1820. I think I described it in the book. It must have been a very closely watched courtship, because there were, you know, probably, what, 12, 13 kids in the household at the time and a little cabin, so not many secrets.
You've mentioned the names of our 3 or 4 founders, however people look at it. One of the interesting things between Juneau and Kilbourne had to do with bridges in the city. Perhaps we could discuss that bridge wars a little bit.
Again, giving the past a present tense, when you cross the river from the east to west sides on any of the downtown bridges, especially Wisconsin Avenue, there's that offset. You know, it's a dogleg crossing, you know, at a pretty sharp angle. And that's part of the landscape of the 21st century, but goes back to a rivalry that was really flourishing back in the 1830s, 1840s between Kilbourne's west side and Juneau and Martin's east side. And to make a long story short, Kilbourne looked at his site and realized that he could expand all the way to the Mississippi. You know, he had unlimited potential, whereas Juneau and Martin on the east side were landlocked here between the river and the lake, so they had no room to expand. Kilbourne reasoned that the east side would become, you know, sort of a satellite of the west side because he had so much more room. That didn't happen. You know, a lot of the plums fell to the east side, the courthouse, land office, postmastership for Juneau. But he mounted what was kind of a siege of the east side, and he tried to deny them access, so he really opposed bridges. The state stepped in back in 1840, probably in response to pressure from the east side, and said, put bridges across the river. So one was put up at Chestnut Street, now Juneau Avenue, and the west siders one night literally cut it loose and dropped, you know, the draw down into the water, which really got the east siders mad. And you had for a few weeks back in 1845, sort of comic opera, but they called it the Bridge War of 1845. You know, a lot of noses bloodied and a lot of names called, a lot of insults traded. And there was actually physical violence. The Sentinel described it, I think, as a number of the combatants were considerably injured but not dangerously. You know, so it was in retrospect, hilarious, you know, that you have these people beating each other over the heads back in 1845, because what they were both after was settlers. You know, they wanted people to come in, and they were not going to attract, you know, newcomers if they were mounting this full-scale feud. So 1846 is when they bury the hatchet and sort of paper over their differences. You know, they didn't become a union, it wasn't really a marriage, but papered over their differences and became the city of Milwaukee. And that's 2 years before Wisconsin became a state. You know, so urban settlement began here rather early.
One of your chapters is called Wheat, Iron, Beer, and Bloodshed. A lot of things went on here in the city of Milwaukee in what was called the machine shop of the world for many years, but as you mentioned, preceding that, it was wheat was a major factor here. Iron was a major factor.
You think of manufacturing as having been the basis of our economy forever. No, it's not by any means true. In the early years, Milwaukee was put here. There's a city here because we had superior potential as a port. We have the deepest bay on the western shore of the lake and the deepest river on the western shore of the lake, Chicago not accepted. So back in a time when everyone and everything traveled by boat, the future belonged to places with superior harbors. That's why Milwaukee's here, very simply. We are built on water. And as the farming frontier developed west of here, Milwaukee became the shipping point for all the grain, especially wheat. We were, back in the 1860s, the largest shipper of wheat in the world. So that was our stock and trade. And there were railroads that were chartered here that became the Milwaukee Road later on, that acted sort of as funnels, you know, sweeping all this wheat, you know, into Milwaukee, and it was transshipped from here by boat, you know, to Buffalo and points east. So manufacturing didn't really begin on a large scale until the years after the Civil War. And the way iron comes in is when the Milwaukee Iron Company opens in Bayview, you know, back in 1868. And that was by far the largest employer here by the 1870s. And where the bloodshed comes in is that in 1886 there was a very powerful movement here by the workers to have an 8-hour day without a cut in pay. Now, back then they were working 10, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for $1 a day on the entry-level jobs. So there was a very persistent effort to improve conditions, and the militia was called out to quell demonstrations, and 5 people were killed by the National Guard in a march on the Bayview Rolling Mill back on the morning of May 5th, 1886. It was the bloodiest labor disturbance in Wisconsin's history. Not well known enough, I think, in the history of Milwaukee and Wisconsin. But that was, you know, certainly a red letter day for organized labor here, and began the process by which workers organized, you know, to take political power as well.
You do in your book talk about a blander part of city of Milwaukee history as well, when things kind of settled down. But during that period of time, Socialist Party was very active in the city of Milwaukee. That changed the way our city developed and the way it grew and the way it acted.
Absolutely, yeah. But before the socialist rise, and they were the reform movement in Milwaukee, just as the progressives were in the state of Wisconsin. But before they began their ascendancy, you had a man here who was mayor named David Rose for 10 years between 1898 and 1910. With one 2-year term off when Sherby Becker became mayor back in 1906. He called himself, or he was known as all the time Rosie. He prided himself in running a wide open town. Graft, bribery, corruption, fraud, all sorts of things were openly practiced here. We were as wild as Chicago on a bad day, and the socialists expressed the electorate's desire for a government that worked, you know, not for special interests, not for purveyors of vice, but for the people. And the socialists became, you know, the vehicle of that sentiment. Victor Berger was the godfather of the movement. In 1910, Amos Seidel is elected mayor. followed by Dan Hone in 1916, who serves for 24 years, then Frank Zeidler in 1948, who serves for 12. So that's not that long ago. 1960 is modern times. So for most of the years between 1910 and 1960, we had a socialist in office here. And what they were after was spending public funds on public works for the public good, including public parks. That's one reason we have a great system, is the legacy of people like socialist Charlie Whitnell.
There have been many different spellings of the name Milwaukee and different interpretations given as to what it means. Do you have any favorites based on your research?
Yeah, my favorite is Milwaukee, which appeared in print back in the 1830s. One of the things I tried to do when I thought I had all the time in the world for this project was to try to find out just what Milwaukee meant, and went and found a couple of native speakers, a couple of Potawatomi natives, and I asked them what Milwaukee meant, and they sort of threw up their hands. Basically it's a corruption of some native word. The best guess is that it's Manawoc, which meant good land. And so this was an area that had a lot of resources for the early settlers.
Milwaukee's a great city. We have wonderful workers, people who work for the city of Milwaukee, and they enjoy delivering high-quality services, and I think the public really appreciates those services. And this is a budget that maintains service quality.
Challenging. It was a challenging budget because for the first time in the last 12 years, and certainly since I've been on the council, which has been for 8.5 years, we've had to deal with raising the property tax rate.
That tax rate was set at $10.49 per $1,000 of assessed valuation. A home assessed at $75,000 would pay $786 in city property taxes. Remember, city tax money is combined with other local government rates and state credits to produce an overall property tax rate. This year, that combined rate is $28.01 per $1,000 of assessed valuation. That $75,000 home would have a total bill of $2,100.
This was a really tough budget for us for a variety of reasons, and those reasons really focus both on the expenditure side of our budget and on the revenue side of our budget.
The expenditure side is where the city spends your tax dollar. Public safety gets the most, followed by public works, general government, neighborhoods, health, and other programs. 80% of those costs are salaries and wages. Healthcare costs also added significantly to the expenditure side of the budget.
So those two components together, healthcare and salaries and wages, grew at a rate of about 7%. Our goal has been to try to keep spending at or below the rate of inflation. So just from the starting point, we had a significant difference between where our revenue trends would be versus where our expenditure trends were going to be.
On the revenue side of the budget, where money collected from residential and commercial property taxes pays for only a small portion of city services, there are more problems. The most money comes in the form of state shared revenues. That part of the revenue pie has been frozen for 7 straight years.
For example, if that program had kept pace with the rate of inflation over that time period, the city would have been receiving about $20 million more to help offset property taxes next year. Because that revenue is not there, we have to look locally for new sources of revenue to help finance city services.
City officials looked at the costs of sanitation as a new source of revenue. They didn't like a new sanitation fee, but most felt they had little choice but to add the annual $44 fee per household to the budget. Budget officials say it was necessary to control the growth of the general fund and qualify for other state aids.
Had we not been able to control that growth or kept all of those costs on the city's property tax levy, we would have lost about $7 million from the state and then again been forced to come up with that additional gap locally. So that was one proposal to help us, again, balance revenue sources, diversify our revenue base, and then also to help qualify for that expenditure restraint program revenue of about $7 million. Actually, it's a quarterly fee of $11, 4 times a year, and it will be paid for as a special charge on the city's city service bill, formerly known as the water bill. And that's how we'll finance about 25% of the city's costs of solid waste collection in 2001.
Alderman Gordon says frozen shared revenues and the need to stay below expenditure restraints gave the council little choice but to adopt the sanitation fee.
The sanitation fee obviously was problematic for most council members, and it was through a lot of discussion, a lot of negotiating, a lot of teeth gnashing, those kinds of things that you generally go through when you're making tough decisions about what your constituents are going to have to deal with, because people tend to deal with things strictly from their pocketbook, and this was a situation where their pocketbook was going to be affected rather substantially. We did the best that we could. I think that nobody is going to be totally satisfied with it, but if we can make sure that the sanitation fee merits what people pay because of the service that they get as a result of paying that fee, then I think we'll be okay.
Green spaces were an important part of this year's budget. Aldermen added money to keep current levels of maintenance for boulevards and other green spaces, and to plant more trees on Milwaukee public school playgrounds. The budget includes a new litter tax on food service operations. It adds 10 more parking checkers and a $3 hike in parking ticket fines. Aldermen decided the library's bookmobile should survive for another year.
The cost of government goes up every year, and we try to make those adjustments based on what the tax rate's going to be, based on people's ability to deal with the fact that, yes, we live in a high taxing state, the 5th highest taxing state in the United States. So people are used to paying for service, and they just want quality service. They want timely service. And our job is to make sure that city government provides that. But obviously there's going to be a cost to it, and we want to try to keep the cost as palatable as possible.
In Madison, a governor's commission has been named to study the issue of shared tax revenues we discussed earlier, and the budget director hopes it will come up with some changes beneficial to Milwaukee.
Some members of that commission have called it the badge of birthright. And what that badge of birthright does is essentially equalizes tax burdens across the state of Wisconsin so that it doesn't cost a resident in the city of Milwaukee way more for just core services than it costs someone, for example, in the community of Shaniqua or the community of Brookfield or the community of Madison. The framework of that program hopefully will be maintained and hopefully in the future even strengthened, and we'll get more money into that formula to help, again, equalize those tax burdens across the state of Wisconsin.
Alderman Gordon says he wants to see the council involved early on in the next budget process, which is already beginning, and says the mayor is agreeable to that.
As far as what we were handed, we dealt with it as best we could. I think that by and large, it's something that we can live with, but now we've got to start looking at prospective budget situations and trying to plan for the next 3 or 4 years. And that's the kind of process that I want to be involved in. I think the council wants to be involved in as well.
Collection of real estate taxes runs from December 18th to January 31st. The Treasurer's office will generally be open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. until 4:45 p.m. Remember, you can make your real estate payments by mail.
This is a sound budget and one that I think does the people's business. It was not a pleasant budget because of the crisis that we faced. I think the council acted very responsibly. All of them, all 17 of them, I think in their own way contributed to making the budget a better and stronger and one that gets the people's business done.
The new trees added to Milwaukee's urban forest are the work of the Forestry Division of the Department of Public Works. Their efforts make our urban forestry program a national model.
I came to Milwaukee because of this forestry program. I went to school in Stevens Point for urban forestry, and I knew the reputation there about Milwaukee, and I think Milwaukee's forestry program is second to none. I mean, we manage over 200,000 street trees, and that's from cradle to grave. It's quite an operation.
Species diversity is critical to maintaining a healthy and vigorous urban forest, so is proper planning and proper planting.
Normally the apprentice loader does all the digging, and he'll dig the hole and put the dirt on the dirt truck in front of him and set the tree next to the hole. And while he's digging the hole and getting it to the proper depth, then one of the guys will take the bolt cutters and cut the basket just enough so the basket is on there, but it'll come apart easily once it's in the hole. After we get the tree in the hole, the apprentice loader covers it up, and then the guys with the shovels kind of smooth off the dirt around the sides and step it down in so there's no air pockets. And then we move on, and then the stake water mulch truck comes in. He throws down a layer of wood chips that keep the roots cool and moist in the summertime, helps retain water, helps keep weeds down and stuff. And then he throws stakes on it. We put stakes on them, and we keep those on for 2 growing seasons, which allows the roots to get established.
The city plants a wide variety of trees. In this stretch at 90th and Dean Road, it's a hardy tree called a Crimean linden.
The City of Milwaukee Forestry Division plants a lot of trees that are native to the area. American honey locust, but the seedless varieties, the linden trees, of which there are Crimean, Redmond, Little Leaf, a white ash, green ash, Norway maple, some sugar maple, and we do plant some oak. We do plant some elms, but the disease-resistant varieties only. The American elm, which is very susceptible to Dutch elm disease, currently is not being planted in the city. However, we do plant the hybridized varieties. They come from our nursery, and we have vendors that supply us also, but primarily the substantial portion of the trees planted by the Forestry Division come from our city nursery out in Franklin. You need to make sure that the tree, when you get it from the nursery, that you take a look and you make sure that you see the root flare at the bottom of the tree. If you don't see it and it looks like a pencil going into the ground, you need to take the top of the ball and scrape off some of that dirt until you see that flared portion of the trunk, and that's where you plant the tree. You plant that at the grade level.
Vandalism is a major problem for new trees, and the Forestry Division asks that residents help out when new trees are added to their neighborhoods.
And then we have door hangers that we hang on the homeowner's door, which tells them what kind of tree it is, how to take care of it. So one thing is to make sure nobody vandalizes the tree. Another thing they can do is to help keep the weeds down around the base of the tree where the mulch is. And then we ask them to put about 10 gallons of water a week on the tree during the growing season.
Studies have shown that street trees provide approximately $17 million in benefits in Milwaukee. Those benefits include reducing stormwater runoff and improving air quality and comfort.
The urban environment is warmer than it is out in the countryside, even at night. And having the trees provide shade over the streets and over people's homes really makes a big difference on keeping our environment nice and warm and cool, and also the aesthetic reasons too. And
it also increases property value too. The street tree population that we have in the city adds substantially to the property values in the city, and it looks nice. They're very aesthetically pleasing, Trees look great.
The illustration on the poster depicts St. Rose of Lima Catholic Church as it looked when it was founded in 1889, then as now a landmark in the Merrill Park neighborhood. St. Rose looks a bit different today. It lost its spires, has a new entrance, but it remains a major center of activity in the area, as it was when founded by the Irish 111 years ago.
Interesting thing about this neighborhood is a core group that are multi-generational. Neighborhood has always been diverse, and that was due to the railroad. They needed strong backs, and they didn't care what nationality or color you were, as long as you could do a good day's work for a small amount of money.
The railroad he refers to is the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul, later the Milwaukee Road. It opened a huge complex in the Menominee Valley in about 1880, and by the early 1900s was Milwaukee's largest employer, providing some 5,000 jobs.
Yes, a lot of people worked for the railroad that lived in the neighborhood here. They were switchmen and the railroad engineers. The railroad engineers were the more prosperous ones because they made bigger money.
When the shops opened, the land just north of the valley was covered with estates of well-to-do Milwaukeeans. Marquette University High School sits on what was once part of the estate of Sherburne Merrill, general manager of the railroad. He subdivided the lands he owned, providing home sites for many railroad workers, and Merrill Park got its name. 33rd and Clybourne looked like this in 1926, the same year that Phil Alberti was born, and began his 74-year stay as a resident and businessman in Merrill Park.
used to deliver the papers down in there. And there was 4 or 5 taverns clear up Canal Street to the corner, and good old Irish taverns. But the people that lived in them barracks types, they wouldn't wander atop the hill. Every once in a while, a hobo would come up from the top of from down in below there and beg for some food.
The Irish were the most visible ethnic group around 1900, but not the only nationality. A mural on the north wall of St. Rose School shows that ethnic, cultural, and religious diversity is still present in Merrill Park. A Buddhist temple is right across the street from St. Rose. Merrill Park is another good example of revitalization efforts going on throughout Milwaukee. When the neighborhood declined, residents decided to fight back. First, against the absentee landlords they blamed for many of the problems.
About 100 of the homes in the neighborhood and never took care of them. All they did was milk the rent out of it and let them deteriorate. And they started patching up the houses with several different kinds of siding and different kinds of roofing. So the neighborhood really was going down until we got together and started a block club.
Actually, how ours came about back in 1990, we had about 50 families, the multi-generation families, really got down at a kitchen table in a house and to make a conscious decision whether the last person moving out turn the lights off or stay and change things. And what better way to try to correct things than if you do it yourself, and that's where the motivation was. So we're here. Obviously, we decided to stay and fight.
The fight against blighted housing and crime by residents, the city, and police hasn't eliminated all the problems in Merrill Park, but there are many success stories.
Now, in 1990, less than 20% of the housing here was owned by people that lived there. We're up to just under 60% now, and our goal is 75. Our crime rate through December of '99, we were down 55% on all crime. We just don't pick and choose. We look at everything.
Merrill Park is 40 square blocks just north of the Menominee Valley to Wisconsin Avenue from 27th to 39th Streets. On its western border, the Merrill Park Playground, offering recreation opportunities to the neighborhood. The playfield area is still known by some old-timers as the circus grounds. Early in the century, Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey, and others drew patrons from throughout the area to Merrill Park. Later, it was the site of the Marquette University Stadium. While you'll find large and small apartments in the Merrill Park neighborhood, the typical home is a large 2-story frame structure built at the turn of the century. Many of its homes are enhanced by distinctive architectural details.
This is an area of the neighborhood, like many neighborhoods, our housing stock we're quite proud of. Primarily the housing stock here was built between 1890 and 1910. Some beautiful woodwork, the designs, the Queen Anne's, the Victorians. And there's a population out there that just likes new homes. So we like to think we can offer the best of both worlds.
One of the new homes is this model at 29th and Michigan, a cooperative effort between the association and the City Housing Initiative. 7 new homes are planned for vacant lots in the 500 and 600 blocks of North 29th Street. On that same street, you'll find several homes built a couple of years ago by the Milwaukee Housing Assistance Corporation. Marquette University High School also made a commitment to the neighborhood. Students, parents, and alumni rebuilt a 95-year-old house across the street from the school at 33rd and Michigan. Former mayors Carl and Frank Zeidler are among the political alumni of Merrill Park. So is former county executive William O'Donnell. Sherburne Merrill's wife became the first woman elected to the Milwaukee School Board. His grandson and namesake, Sherburne Becker, was mayor in the early 1900s. Becker is the mayor who was annoyed by large clocks along Grand Avenue and personally headed a sledgehammer crew which demolished most of them. It wouldn't be a Milwaukee neighborhood without a tavern or two, but Sherburne Merrill was a firm believer in temperance. His original deed restrictions prevent any bars between 30th and 35th Streets. Bob Green has lived in Merrill Park since 1955. Phil Alberti since 1926. A son lives nearby. Is their neighborhood on the way back?
I guess the proof is people, we have a family that just moved in from Aguanago. They just wanted to be in the city, but they wanted some green space, yard and that. It's another family. The husband actually grew up over on 30th and has been living in Waukesha for 17 years. And the wife's from Waukesha, and he's always wanted to move back. And she recently, they visited family here in the neighborhood, has seen the turnaround and what's going on, the great things. And they decided, they called like 2 weeks ago and wanted to know what houses are available.
Merrill Park has a rich history, one that includes some serious problems. But longtime residents and newcomers are working together to make the future a bright one.
I've always said Merrill Park is a good place to live. I always said that one day Merrill Park would come back to be as good as it used to be. Because at one time it was, I think, one of the best places to live in the city.
Maybe it's the ghost of Sherburne Merrill, I don't know. But something unique about this neighborhood that draws you here. It's the diversity. It's the friendliness. You know, maybe it's hard to put a definitive thing on there, but it's a combination of things, and it's home. We say, you know, you're not a racial or ethnic group here, you're a neighbor, and that's what gives Merrill Park its strength.